Welcome to the first of what will surely be many 2015 NBA free agency videos in the weeks ahead. This is my general preview of the 2015 NBA free agency period. I'll give you my overview and outlook on this year's free agent class, some of the big names to keep your eye on, the reality of this year's class, the strengths and weaknesses of this year's class. I'll also be doing it by position in upcoming videos. I'll be looking at point guards on the market, shooting guards, small forwards, power forwards, center, all of it. And then as July 1st hits and the negotiation windows begin and we start to hear the reports of players agreeing to terms with teams here and there, I'll be responding to those deals. I'll be giving you my thoughts on those deals as I deem appropriate. I'll talk about some of the really good ones, sure, and most certainly we'll be talking about some of the ones that make you go, Now, in terms of this year's free agency period, one thing I think that's going to be important for a lot of us to keep in mind, myself included, as I'm surely ready to blast on some of these bad-looking deals that are going to happen, is that with the salary cap set to explode after next season with the new NBA television deal kicking in and perhaps exploding as much as $20 million or more over what it's going to be for this year, there are going to be plenty of teams that are going to be giving guys more money than maybe they should, in part because they're trying to keep that in mind. So they're trying to lock these guys up to give themselves as an organization some certainty too, whereas a guy that's maybe only worth $10 million gets $14 million, but part of the fear is they don't want to wait another year to where these guys might end up getting $20 million in a new market, in a new salary cap environment. That's one thing to keep in mind. The second thing to keep in mind about this free agent period is that there are a lot of big names available. This is actually, in theory, a pretty good free agency class. Other than point guard, you have big names and huge stars at every position, all-stars, all NBA type of guys at every position. And like I said, except maybe point guard, and even the point guard class isn't all that bad. This is a pretty good free agent class, in theory. But in all actuality and in practice, many of these top free agents, for a variety of different reasons, really aren't that much in terms of free agents at all. They're just there on the market. It's about financial flexibility. It's about positioning potentially themselves for bigger money coming up down the road, as I mentioned, with the expected explosion next year of the salary cap due to the new television revenues coming in. So you'll see a lot of guys on the free agent market, a lot of big names, but most of them aren't going anywhere. Like, is Marc Gasol going to end up anywhere other than Memphis? I don't think so. Is LeBron James going to end up anywhere other than Cleveland? I don't think so. Is Kawhi Leonard going to end up anywhere other than San Antonio? Again, no, I don't think so. So you look at some of those names, and they make the class look a lot better than what it actually is, because a lot of these guys just really, honestly, for differing reasons, aren't in play. And I might even throw a Dwayne Wade into that category because, yes, while he might be exploring his options and he is a free agent, it's hard to envision Dwayne Wade, at least in my mind at this particular moment, at age 33, getting any more money on the open market than what he could get with Miami. I can't see him being comfortable in any other situation other than Miami, and I can't see another team being willing to give a 33-year-old injury-plagued two-guard whose best days are behind him $15+ million a year for the next several seasons. Dwayne Wade is trying to get paid. He's trying to get his money while he still can. He's got one big-time deal left in him, and he knows it and understands it, and I applaud him for getting it. This is a guy that's given up a lot of money for the betterment of the team. He's won NBA championships. Why shouldn't he look to get himself as much as he possibly can at the tail end of his career? Here's a guy that took less money to stay in Miami, all the while they gave Chris Bosh a max contract to stay. Why can't Dwayne Wade get a max contract? If anybody deserves a max contract based off of what they've done for an organization over the course of a decade, it's got to be Dwayne Wade in Miami. And again, while you'll hear rumblings about this team and that team, at the end of the day, it's all, to me, positioning and leverage. Dwayne Wade's not going anywhere. Similar to Jimmy Butler. He might want to sign an offer sheet with the Lakers. He may very well end up signing an offer sheet with the Lakers. But at the end of the day, he's not going anywhere. He's going to remain a Chicago Bull unless something crazy happens and a sign and trade scenario comes up. But in order for that to work, for the Bulls to get the type of commodities in return to even begin to try and justify that type of deal, it'd have to involve a 3 or 4 team deal. So again, the whole point I'm getting at here is you'll see a lot of names on the market, but a lot of these names to me really don't even count as free agents. It's just a matter of they're renegotiating with their current teams pretty much. But there are some big names that I think you do need to keep your eye on in this free agent period. And I'll look at one guy maybe at each position for differing reasons as to why they're the ones to watch. I'll start off with point guards. And in a class that isn't that great, it has some good players but no real superstars. Rajon Rondo would probably be the biggest name out of this group. Yeah, you'll have Goran Dragic on the market, but again, is anybody going to pay him more than what the Heat might with 90 to 100 million over 4 or 5 seasons? I don't think so. I'd assume Brandon Knight is going to re-sign with the Phoenix Suns because I don't think, again, anybody's going to give him more money. But when you look at a guy like Rajon Rondo, here's a guy that, for all intents and purposes, we know his time is done in Dallas. They don't want him. He doesn't want to be there. He's moving on somewhere. Here's a former All-Star, NBA champion, a guy that can do a lot of things on the floor, but a guy that rubs a lot of people the wrong way, both teammates, coaches, front offices, both in Boston and especially in Dallas. A guy at 29 years of age who's never really developed a consistent jump shot, who isn't as good defensively as he once was, at times really can slow down what a team does on the offensive end. He's a name, but he's not a fit for a lot of teams. So it'll be very interesting to see where he goes. I would envision at this point in time he's going to want to pursue some type of one-year kind of prove-it type of deal. Where he could go to an organization that's going to let him have some free reign. Maybe he can play with a veteran coach, an experienced coach that he can get along with or could put up with him. So that way both sides get something out of it. Team gets a stopgap guy that will be an upgrade at the one, and Rondo gets a chance to play big minutes and try and play himself into a big contract next offseason when, again, the money's going to get a lot bigger and the salary cap set to explode. It could potentially be a really good situation for a Rajon Rondo. At the end of the day, I really think the only true suitor that I envision at this point in time for him has to be the Sacramento Kings. There have been reports of interest on his end for them. There's been reports of their interest in him. And honestly, at this point in time, based off of the circumstance and situation, I think it's a good fit for all people involved, especially if the Kings, for some reason, decide to keep George Karl. To me, George Karl and Rajon Rondo actually seem like a good fit at this point in time. It's 1 year. It's not something that's going to, weigh down your organization too much. If he becomes a turd to deal with, then you only have to deal with him for 1 season, and at that point in time, you might even explore cutting him. So he's kind of one of those medium risk, but it's not that big of a risk, potentially decent reward type of options without you necessarily having to plug a ton of money into him long term. I look at the 2-guard position, I see a guy like Monta Ellis. Here's a guy that can score the ball. There's no question he's a guy that can shoot. He can create off of the dribble. He fits that kind of modern mold of the NBA combo guard. He plays the 2-guard, but he has some ball handling skills. He has some point guard ability, but he's not a point guard. He's not a full 2-guard. Just kind of that combo guard, that versatile type of guy that NBA teams like. But he's not all that great on the defensive end, so you have to have somebody in the backcourt that can defend in part to mask Monta Ellis's deficiencies on the defensive end. He has a bit of a reputation for being kind of a selfish, me-first type of guy and a shoot-first, ask-questions-later type of guy, although I thought he did a better job of blending in towards the end of his tenure in Dallas. But you look at him, when you got guys like Jimmy Butler and Dwayne Wade, probably, in my opinion, not going anywhere, a guy like Monta Ellis is very likely to end up leaving Dallas. They've got Dirk still. They're going to be big in the market for a big man, probably DeAndre Jordan, if not getting a guy like DeAndre Jordan. They just gave Chandler Parsons $45 million for 3 years. It's hard to see where they're going to want to devote double-digit millions to a guy like Monta Ellis. It just is. You look at him, a team like Indiana could make a good deal of sense, especially with George Hill manning the point there. A good, solid defensive point guard. A guy like Monta Ellis might make some sense there in Indianapolis, take some of the scoring burden off of a guy like a Paul George and a George Hill. And then you look at Atlanta, too. You look at Kyle Korver. He's nice in some ways for what he does in Atlanta's offense, but the problem for Atlanta at times is they lack guys that can create their own shot and create their own shot off the dribble. And when you look at a backcourt with Jeff Teague and Monta Ellis, that would be an upgrade. There's no question in terms of that playmaking and shot-making ability over a Jeff Teague and Kyle Korver front court, and especially if a DeMarre Carroll does end up leaving Atlanta, even though I'd ultimately be surprised if that did happen. Atlanta would need to find a guy that could fit their system to a degree and give them some of that scoring punch that they lose with DeMarre Carroll going the way at the 3, and a guy like Ellis can do that. I think ultimately he'll end up in Indiana. Maybe Dallas will end up bringing him back. I just don't really see it. Now, in terms of at small forward, this is a pretty good class again for small forward. The one guy I think you got to pay attention to the most is got to be Tobias Harris of the Orlando Magic. Here's a kid that's not even 23 yet, who seems to be just starting to really figure things out. Is he an all-star level player? Not yet. Could he be in the right situation? Maybe. But there are probably going to be plenty of teams with money to spend, like Boston and Detroit, that are going to be looking at him as a wing with size that can put the ball in the hoop at 22 years of age, assuming that even if you give him 4 or 5 years, he still might not have reached the peak of his career by the end of that deal. There's going to be a lot of appeal and a lot of intrigue there, and as a result, I would expect the process to sign Tobias Harris might take a little bit because there could potentially be quite a number of suitors. Or at least, if anything else, there will be some suitors, and it's going to be a very hard decision for Tobias Harris. Look, I think the 3 best options for Tobias Harris would be staying in Orlando, even though they did just draft Hazonia, that's true. But they've got Oladipo, they've got Elfrid Payton. You got to like some of the things, at least from a perimeter standpoint, that Orlando has done, building their team kind of in the mold of that modern NBA team. I like the way this team gets after it, and Tobias Harris is another guy that gets after it. Orlando makes sense. But Detroit makes sense even with the drafting of Stanley Johnson. You know, Tobias Harris is a more established and proven commodity, and who's to say that him and Stanley Johnson couldn't play on the floor at the same time? You know, and then you look at Boston, too. One thing they're going to need is some size somewhere, some playmaking ability in the front court, and Tobias Harris would provide that at the 3 position. Boston, again, another team like Detroit that has room under the salary cap. I really think at the end of the day, Tobias Harris might end up with the Boston Celtics, where they view his upside to be so much that they'll be willing to overpay him to the tune of maybe $60 or $64 million over 4 years. And Orlando might get to the point where they're like, we're going to have to re-sign Oladipo at some point, maybe Payton. We just brought in Hazonia. We've got Aaron Gordon. Is Tobias Harris really worth $15 or $16 million a year? This is going to be a player that's going to be really fascinating for me to watch in this free agency period. In terms of the power forwards, I don't think Kevin Love ultimately goes anywhere. But again, stranger things happen. The power forward that we pretty much all know is leaving the team he was with for so many years is LaMarcus Aldridge. Portland is a non-factor for the most part. Unless at the last minute he has a change of heart or he just realizes that Portland can pay him more money than anybody else for a longer period of time, we can almost safely assume that LaMarcus Aldridge is leaving the Portland Trailblazers. Well, what are his options? You've got the Lakers, you've got the Spurs, you've got the Mavericks, you've got maybe even the Houston Rockets if they want to really get froggy. You know, there's a lot to indicate that LaMarcus Aldridge is gone in Portland, and he probably is. And as a result, it's all going to be about fit. It's all going to be about his long-term happiness. He's going to want to chase, probably a deeper run into the playoffs, which is why the reports of him going to the Lakers are kind of fascinating to me because I don't really see where he would envision getting a long-term run in the playoffs with the roster it currently is, way it currently is. You're talking about, yes, they brought in D'Angelo Russell. They've got Jordan Clarkson. You've got Kobe Bryant for 1 more year, but you've got Kobe Bryant for 1 more year. Is really a situation that you want to be in long-term. The Lakers have a history over the years of being able to go get that big-time free agent when they need to, and maybe this is that guy that helps bridge the gap to that next generation for the Lakers organization. But there seems to be a strong belief that LaMarcus Aldridge wants to go back to his home state of Texas, which would put both the Spurs and the Mavericks in play, and even the Rockets as well. The odd thing is that I really don't know where the hell LaMarcus Aldridge fits. You're going to have a lot of teams interested in him, and he's going to be interested in plenty of teams. Honestly, the option that makes more sense from a team that's close to winning, but he could go there and have a big impact, that would make sense, believe it or not, is the Toronto Raptors. Now, obviously, they can't pay him more than the Portland Trailblazers, and with him getting a gig up in Toronto, they have to pay higher taxes, which means he's technically making less money. That's just a wild card team to throw out there, and I believe he's even scheduled to meet with them. That would be one team that makes a lot of sense. It's just at the end of the day, he might end up with the Lakers or he might end up with the Spurs. I don't see where Dallas makes sense, especially if they end up signing a guy like a DeAndre Jordan. I don't see where Houston works because they'd have to do so much to clear out the space to be able to get a LaMarcus Aldridge. Then they'd be bare bones throughout the rest of their roster. LaMarcus Aldridge, a guy with a lot of suitors, but I'm not sure any one great fit. But at the end of the day, he might end up as a Laker after all. And then I look at centers. Marcus All again. I doubt he's going anywhere. Brook Lopez, probably not going anywhere. But DeAndre Jordan probably is. Now, there's a chance that because, again, the Clippers can pay him more money, that all the shit that we hear talked about with the rift between him and CP3 and the fact that he wants to be a number 2 option and not a number 3 option, all that talk could just end up going by the wayside when DeAndre Jordan faces a financial reality that the Clippers can pay him more for a longer term than anybody else. But there could be something to this. Usually where there's smoke, there's fire. And you kind of get the sense that maybe there is something more there and that DeAndre Jordan probably has played his last game with the Clippers. Now, you've heard some talks about Kobe even calling DeAndre Jordan, tried to recruit him to come to the Lakers, and in some ways he would make some sense for that team based off of their current construction, although just about anybody would make a sense for that joke team right now. But at the end of the day, the team that seems to make the most sense would be the Dallas Mavericks. They've got the ability to probably give him a decent amount of money. He would be able to be sold on the fact that he might end up being the number 2 option as opposed to the number 3 option. Although if you still have Dirk and you have Chandler Parsons, DeAndre goes back to being the number 3 option on offense more likely than not, at least in the short term. But maybe long term he's looking at becoming the number 2 option. It's really hard to say, but I think there's a good chance DeAndre Jordan leaves. If DeAndre Jordan leaves the Clippers, Tyson Chandler probably goes to the Clippers. I think those two are going to kind of be symbiotically related. Although there is a chance maybe that a Tyson Chandler gets intrigued by playing for Jason Kidd in Milwaukee. But there are names out there that can be had. DeAndre Jordan can be had. LaMarcus Aldridge can be had. Tobias Harris can be had. Monta Ellis can be had. Rajon Rondo can be had. In different situations for different teams. It's going to be very interesting to see where these guys end up. But again, you guys can let me know your thoughts on this free agency class as a whole this year, what you expect to see happen. Who do you think are the biggest candidates to be bargains for their teams? Who are going to be the biggest candidates to be big-time reaches, I guess you would say, and big-time overspends? Let me know all of that in the comment section below. And like I said, I will be doing follow-up videos previewing each of the positions in this 2015 NBA free agency period.